evening, everybody. Everybody good tonight? Guess what? We have a microphone tonight. I called the library and she said she was going to make sure that we had one tonight. So we want to thank everybody for coming. Please feel free to grab some refreshments that are provided by Menu Maker. Rico, if you want to stand, she provided the refreshments for us. It's called Menu Makers. If you want to get her information before she leaves, she caters and does all kinds of parties and events and many, many things all over the place. So we want to thank you once again for those, and we want to thank everybody again for being here. And just as you come in, please grab you some refreshments, and we're going to go ahead and get started because it is 6:01, and we like to start on time. And we want to thank our board members who are here. I see our board chair, Pam Bright, and anybody else? Some are on the way. And Mary Pierce. Hi. And James Moore is coming. He's coming from Nashville. So we want to thank the board members and all of our volunteers. If you volunteer for the African American Heritage Society, raise your hand. Well, all of y'all have done something in one way or another for the organization. So we always want to say thank you. We never, ever, ever want to just take you for granted for your time and dedication that you give to our organization. At this time, I'd like to welcome Dr. Learotha Williams. Dr. Williams, Jr., PhD, is a scholar of African American Civil War and Reconstruction and Public History of Tennessee State University. At TSU, he teaches courses that explore Civil War and Reconstruction, history, African Americans in public memory, black politicians, civil rights, 20th century black intellectuals, African Americans in Tennessee, and slavery and emancipation in Middle Tennessee. Dr. Williams has worked as a historic site specialist for the state of Florida, acted as coordinator for the African American Studies program at Armstrong Atlantic State University, and served as a trustee of the historic Savannah Foundation in Savannah, Georgia. He's done a lot, y'all. At TSU, he coordinates and he's young, so he's still got plenty of time to do more. At TSU, he coordinates the North Nashville Heritage Project, an effort that seeks to encourage a greater understanding of the history of North Nashville, including, but not limited to, Jefferson Street and its historic relationship to the greater Nashville community. Amen, brother. Thank you for that. His most recent publications include a recently co-authored book with Serena Gilbert, From the Fiery Furnace to the Promised Land, Vanderbilt University Press, 2025. And that book is just coming out, right?
Came out last week.
Okay. And he'll tell you all about that. And co-editor with Annie Thurber, I'll Take You There, Exploring Nashville Social Justice Sites, Nashville, Vanderbilt University Press, 2021. Here in Stones of Hope in a City of Discarded Rocks, William Edmondson's Nashville and Maureen R. Sullivan's. The sculpture of William Edmondson Tombstones, Garden Ornaments and Stonework, Nashville, Vanderbilt University Press, 2021. Black Faces Along the Cumberland Basin in Gilder, John Voyage of the Adventure, Retracing the Donaldson Party's Journey to the Founding of Nashville, Nashville, Vanderbilt University Press, 2020. Boy, he does a lot. And A Bomb in Gilead, Love, Hope, and Despair in North Nashville, in Murals of North Nashville now. Nashville, Vanderbilt University Press, 2019. Dr. Williams is a native of Tallahassee, Florida, where he earned a PhD in history from Florida State University in 2003. We are so grateful to have Dr. Williams. Let's give him a big hand as he shares with you what's on his heart. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Good evening. I'm cognizant of the fact that it is Monday evening and we in the midst of football season. And y'all have decided to come here to spend a few minutes with me, and for that, I'm grateful. Should have warned Miss Alma that I come from a long line of Baptist preachers, right? I'm not one of them, but I have Baptist tendencies. And she didn't give me a time limit, so.
Well, the library closes at 8.
Well, we have ample time, amen. I want to talk to you this evening about one of the most important moments in American history. And this moment is actually the thing that has me speaking to you tonight as Dr. Williams as opposed to Attorney Williams, right? Because I was so curious. And then when I got the opportunity to study this as opposed to go to the University of Florida Law School, I decided to study history. But this moment is significant because this is a moment where America had the opportunity to line up its words with its deeds, right? So we had the Constitution, we had the Declaration of Independence, but it took a war for us to seriously get to the point where we're trying to line these things up. But what I want y'all to do tonight is to try to look at this moment through the eyes of the enslaved. As I became a professor of history, our voices were noticeably missing from the narrative. So once I became a professor, I was like, okay, I'm going to tell the story, but it's going to be from perhaps from the vantage point of my great-great-grandfather, a great-great-grandmother. And it quickly dawned on me that this was not ancient history. For me, slavery is about 3 grandmas away. That makes sense? Okay. So I encourage you to take this journey with me. I have some slides. I don't know how the script is going to come up, but I'll do some reading where it's necessary. Okay, and Lord, I can't see this on my computer, so I'm going to have to step back a little bit. My students are reading this at TSU right now. It's an excerpt from a talk James Baldwin gave when he talked about his understanding that what had been taught about slavery was inaccurate or unclear. And it reads as follows. He says, if one fine day I discover that I have been lied to all the years of my life, and my mother and my father were being lied to, if I discover that in fact, though I was bred and bought and sold like a mule, though I never really was a mule, if I discover that I was never really happy picking all that cotton and digging in all those mines to make other people rich, and if I discover that those songs the darkies sang and sing were not just the innocent expressions of primitive people, but extremely subtle and difficult, dangerous and tragic expressions of what it felt like to be in chains, then by one's presence simply and by the attempt to walk from there to there, you've begun to frighten the white world. They have always known that you were not a mule. They've always known that no one wishes to be a slave. They've always known that the bales of cotton in the textile mills and the entire metropolis is built on black labor, that the black was not doing it out of love. He was doing it under the whip, the threat of the gun, and even more desperate and subtle, the threat of the Bible. So what Baldwin is doing here, he's calling out the way that our history has been taught to us. And I submit to you, and I said it earlier, oftentimes when we look at the past, and y'all can think about how your history was taught to you here in Williamson County, I can almost guarantee you that it's taught the same way in South Georgia, where my people from, or North Florida. There's some voices that are missing from the narrative. And when we bore down and we try to figure out what things were like, I ask you to consider this, that enslaved people were this country's most valuable assets. Okay, you had the enslaved people, then the land, and then other things. But I pulled this particular slide because it has to do with Franklin. And in this particular episode, there were a group of children that were being sold, I guess it would have been in y'all's public square. And y'all look at the names and the ages on this. It says Surrey, who's age 18, and her asking price was $1,035. And you got Margaret and an infant. Not really sure if that was her baby, but they were asking $1,670 for it, $1,670. Then you have Amanda, who's 9 years old, and Alice, who's 13. Amanda's fetching a price of about $1,130. And then you see Alice, who is being sold for $1,400. Now, I want y'all to put yourselves in the minds of these children who are being sold, because these are children that I have displayed before you. And you think, how old is Amanda? Amanda's 9 years old. What grade are you in when you're 9 years old these days? Fourth? Okay. Then Alice is 13. And you notice how they're fetching a high price. So you're starting to think, okay, wow. I remember the conversations that my mom had with me when I was 9 years old and when I was 13 years old, and how she, whenever I was going through a situation that I was unclear about or unsure about, she'd give me some advice on how to proceed. And as I saw this, I was like, Lord, I wonder what Amanda's caretakers told her before she was sent to the auction block. Because you see, you don't see her name or her parents up there anywhere. Or Alice, for that matter. I'm a historian and not a mathematician, so my brother Lamont there can check the figures on these if these are off. The asking price for Alice today would be about $55,000 to $57,000. Seems like you're thinking you're at an auction block and this guy's going to buy her. He's looking at her, but he ain't just thinking about how much she's worth. Because of a law called parta sequitur ventrum, that would follow the womb, that which is born follows the womb. That is a law that said that the status of the child always follows that of its mother. So it doesn't matter who the daddy is or what his status is, as long as the mother is a slave, then the child was going to be enslaved. So what we have here at the start of this journey from slavery to freedom, at the start of this first crossing, you have black women who have a fervent desire to end the generational curse of slavery. And the record is clear as far as to them having a desire to be free. In my classes, my students and I, we read these runaway slave ads to each other to try to get a feel for what the institution was like. I won't go through all of these, but I'm hoping that y'all can see it. On some of these, you have like a strange looking F, but that's actually an S. But when we look at these, these ads are pregnant with information about the slave experience, about the value of them. They give very vivid descriptions of their physical features, right? Because a lot of them will have scars. A lot of them will be, we were reading one today about a man who was missing his toes on his right foot. And then another one that we read in class today, I probably should have showed it to y'all, where a woman was missing all of her teeth except for her two bottom teeth. She was like, wow, what causes us to lose our teeth besides maybe taking some trauma to the mouth? Maybe malnutrition, eating stuff, so that gives us some insight in what their diets may have been like. But we see that they are valuable to these people. And when we go through the newspapers, these things appear everywhere in the newspapers. So what does it say? If I'm going to the Franklin newspaper and I see page after page after page of fugitive slave ads, okay, now I got to try to reconcile what I'm being told or taught at all these plantations around here. And I'm not picking on just Franklin here. I do this to everybody. So start trying to reconcile what you see. And in many instances, they're running away, they're absconding, they're trying to get to Detroit, to Canada, to Illinois, to Louisiana. Speaks to their desire to be free. And it also speaks to desperation. In this particular ad, we see a young woman who is running away from Murfreesboro, Tennessee. She's a bright mulatto girl, Judy. She's about 21. And I don't know if y'all can notice by this photograph, but she is pregnant. Now, imagine the desperation a woman has to be. For those of y'all that have had babies, you're not trying to run away in the woods with your destination unclear. So I'm thinking that, wow, I'm reading this ad, but what I'm reading in many instances is an act of desperation, but also a statement that she wasn't going to bring her baby up in the world as an enslaved person. In this conversation, I want y'all to also think about the rivers that are in these areas. I live in Nashville, and Nashville was the second largest slave port in the volunteer state. The only city that sold more enslaved black folks was Memphis. And it's interesting because the buying and selling of people in Nashville was arguably its first big business. If y'all next time y'all are in the city and you go to the public square, they sold black people at the public square every Saturday around 2 o'clock at the courthouse steps. But then if you go a little bit further down the street, down what used to be Charlotte, and go to the intersection of, y'all know where 4th and Charlotte is? Right at that corner, we placed a historical marker to commemorate the black people that were sold there, but also to tell the story of Nashville as a slave trading district. Because here's the thing, they were bought and sold there, but you could go to the Planters Bank and get a loan on 10 months terms, where you could pay them off over 10 months if your money was kind of funny. And you could also get them insured. There was an insurance company at the northwest corner of the public square called Aetna. And I think Aetna is building a brand new building right down 65, if I remember correctly. So we're looking at it as big business. But I want you to think about it these things in terms of these spaces, these waterways becoming avenues for liberty. If I am an African American, enslaved African American, I'm trying to run away, or I'm trying to escape to the north, and I've heard about this place called Ohio. I'm thinking if I can get on a boat in Nashville, stow away, 4 or 5 days from now, I'll be, where the Cumberland runs into the Ohio River. If I get on the right side of the Ohio River, that means I'm free. But these avenues were avenues of freedom, but oftentimes they could be places where these folks met their demise. I think it's Zamiri Baraka who wrote this poem. He says, there's a railroad at the bottom of the Atlantic and it's made of human bones. Well, what is he talking about? He's talking about the slave trade, transatlantic slave trade. But in my exploration of Middle Tennessee, I'm finding you could say the same thing about the Cumberland. You can find the same thing about you could say the same thing about the Harpeth. So I submit to you that even in these acts of desperation, we find resistance to the institution that would claim this enslaved woman who was giving birth to babies. And it's weird in a way because enslavers had the opportunity to lay claim to her babies before they were even born. So as we go back to that 9-year-old and that 13-year-old that I presented to you, when the guy's looking at those people, he's not just thinking about that little girl. He's saying, okay, maybe she could have 14, 15 babies. Okay. So just a couple of stats for you to consider, and this is going to segue into the Civil War. I referenced earlier that enslaved people were America's most valuable assets. Take a second to consider these numbers. Largest financial asset in 1860. We're mindful the war began in 1861. Their combined value has been estimated around $3 billion to $4 billion in 1860 dollars. This is $1860. That's a lot of money today. Anyway, just to bring it home, I think we're spending about $2 billion on the Titans' new stadium, right? So, by some estimates, the value of enslaved people accounted for about 16 to 20% of this nation's total wealth. In the South specifically, enslaved people represented nearly half of all wealth. And this is something you need to consider for where we are today. Blacks made up more than 50% of Williamson County's residents at the start of the war. So if we were here in 1860, that meant basically every other person that I would see would be black. So let's talk about memory for a second there. And I can speak on Nashville as well, but I'm here in Williamson County now. Does our public history reflect that? Okay, and you don't have to answer because I don't want you folks to leave here mad after saying.
Actually, there's a plaque that says that in the gardens. There's a trail that goes around that says exactly that. Picking up both figures. So it's their plaques.
Okay, I'm gonna get messy here. Well, no, I ain't. When we think about that, it feels like it should be more. And let me give you another example and I'll move on. I'm from Tallahassee, and I love a school that the folks I work for hate. Okay. Love FAMU, Florida A&M University. And I see all y'all Tigers alum rolling your eyes right now. But my brother come to town for homecoming, and he'll do all of the Tiger stuff. And he'll be there for 4 days. And when he leaves, I can tell that he's been at my house, right? Because all of my top shelf stuff, gone. Car probably doesn't have any gas in it. Fridge is empty. And he's only been there for 4 days. So how can we go to a plantation, right, that might have had a family of 5, but they got 150 enslaved people that have lived there since like the 1800s? I tell my students that our ancestors' fingerprints should be all over this place. And it's there once you learn how to look for things. And this is what I tell them to do. Oftentimes, if the brick mason was a black guy, chances are some of those bricks are going to have fingerprints on them. And I know for certain at the Masonic Lodge, I think it is, there's some on the side over there. So that's their way of tagging them. The Two Rivers Plantation in Nashville, not far from where I live, the brick mason took his child's foot and put it in the brick. So you go around the side of the house, you see a big little footprint in the bricks. Ask about who the brick masons were. Not the brick masons, excuse me, the blacksmiths. I mean, go into these homes and look at the floors and say, okay, are these the original nails? And if they say, yeah, then those are some good nails, man, because they've been holding those floors down for what? Almost 200 some odd years. So when we look at these spaces through the eyes of our enslavers and what they did, we start to tell a new story. We start to write another chapter to much of the things that we've been told. Oh, I'm going a little bit too fast. Okay, now the crossings of the Civil War. I'm not here to lecture y'all on the Civil War. I think we're here in Franklin, we got that down with the Battle of Franklin, so we won't retread that. But I do want to challenge you, if you need to be challenged, about the causes of the war. My first job was in Savannah, Georgia, and I taught Civil War and Reconstruction. But they broke me out of that because it seemed like every place I went, there was somebody trying to tell me a little bit about the Civil War and the battle that their great ancestor fought in. And it was, the first day I moved, no lie, y'all, I'm unloading the truck, and when neighbor come across the street and he asked me what do I do, I said, I teach history. He's like, what you teach? I said, Civil War, Reconstruction. He ain't heard nothing about the Reconstruction part. His next question was, do you teach the Civil War the right way? It's like, well, yeah, the South loses the war. But for Tennessee, just got a couple of things I want y'all to consider, and I apologize. Oh, the print is all right on that. This is Governor Isham Harris, who in January explains why Tennessee is in support of the Confederacy and why they're going to ultimately leave the Union. Okay, so in this, and you can see the italicized part, he talks about the South demanding constitutional guarantees for slavery. Says compromises on slavery are no longer acceptable. Then he says the South must either secure its rights within the Union or assert its independence to protect its institutions, including slavery. And this particular excerpt appears in the Richmond Enquirer about 4 days after the Emancipation Proclamation was issued. And this is issued by Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederacy at the time. And there's no ambiguity about what he's saying here, right? Okay. On or after February 22nd, 1863, all free Negroes within the limits of the Southern Confederacy shall be placed on the slave status and deemed to be chattels, they and their issue forever. So he's saying all of the free folks that are living here are going to be slaves after this day. Then he goes on to say that captured black individuals in the free states would be forced into slavery, and free black people in conquered states would be reduced to permanent servitude, aiming to solidify racial hierarchies and maintain public order. And the last one. And this is a direct quote. I'll let you consider it for a second. He says, in view of these facts and conscientiously believing that the proper condition of the Negro is slavery or complete subjugation to the white man, and entertaining that the belief that the day is not distant when the old Union would be restored with slavery nationally declared to be the proper condition of all of African descent. And in view of the future harmony and progress of all the states of America, I have been induced to issue this address so that there may be no misunderstanding in the future. And I hate to inform Mr. Davis, but we got a lot of misunderstanding going on in the year 2025. But nonetheless, when the war broke out, African Americans, enslaved African Americans, for them, it wasn't any ambiguity about the war. Once the war began, for them, it was going to be about slavery. And one of the myths that the many Southerners held was that, these enslaved people will continue working like they always have, freeing our menfolk up to go to war. But they quickly found out that that was not the case. One word that was oftentimes used to describe these enslaved folks, once the constant fear of violence was gone, they became, quote, troublesome. Many of them so much so that they began to leave. So what we have is a constant stream of black people leaving their plantations, off not really sure where freedom was, but they knew that freedom wasn't on this particular plantation. So some make their ways to behind Union lines. One of the most important in Nashville is Fort Negley. Fort Negley was built by conscripted black labor. It was a Yankee fort that lay in disrepair for a long time and ignored. But thanks to some of the folks right here from Franklin's own Eleanor Fleming, and some of my friends in Nashville, we've, amen. The doors of the church are open. Now we look at these spaces as spaces of freedom, spaces of liberty. And this I'm talking about Fort Negley. And the migration of people to places where they could be free, where they could experience freedom for the first time. A lot of them were not well received. Shortly after the Battle of Stones River, a group of African Americans were spotted on Murfreesboro Pike, and this is down there near Laverne. They were stopped by a group of Confederates. They were taken from the train, and about 20 of them were murdered right there on Murfreesboro Pike. I have spent many Saturdays trying to figure out where that was, because I feel like there ought to be a marker or something there. But the account was in the newspapers, the accounts were in Harper's Weekly, and it's very clear as to what happened here. The title of this particular article was Black Flag and the Confederacy or something like that. You know, black flag means no quarter given. Okay. But there are some spaces that I want y'all to think about as we move ahead in terms of trying to figure out what this journey to freedom looked like. Fort Negley would be one because a contraband camp was formed there. A contraband camp was simply a camp that was put up by the Union Army to take in these enslaved people that were coming behind their lines. Okay. The one in the top left corner is Dunbar Cave in Clarksville. And the one in the bottom right corner, my friend Rachel introduced me to that. Rachel, are you here? No? It's Fort Granger. Okay. These were places where African Americans experienced their first taste of freedom, right? They are here now. Their masters may be off at war or whatever. They are here, and now they're getting their first taste of freedom. But their first taste of freedom, for many, was to get sick and die. Die from what? Cholera, dysentery, pneumonia. I know at Fort Negley, from one of the excerpts that I read, the first group that showed up there, they didn't really have tents for them, so the only cover they had over their heads at night was the stars in the heavens. And I see the descendants of Fort Negley, and I feel like I ought to give them a standing ovation anytime they walk in the room, because I've been out at Fort Negley when I was out there one year and it was 17 degrees out there. And it's like, I need to be rethinking my life choices, man, because. But I submit to you that they did not come there empty-handed. And this is important. They didn't have much in material possessions, but what did they bring with them? They brought their culture. Culture is a really broad term, so what do I mean? Y'all know those songs that our ancestors lifted up out of the tobacco fields and the cotton fields? They brought that with them. And I defy anybody to tell me that Nashville would be what it is today without those rhythms. They brought the idea that they needed an education, and the federal government needed to pay for it. So we begin to see, after these first episodes with the Freedmen's Bureau establishing schools, they're like, okay, we need to get a public school system in the South. This was an idea that resonated in our minds before we acted on it. They brought in new understandings of what it meant to be free. We're going to redefine freedom. Freedom's not going to look like it did for free blacks living in the South, right? Because that was not really freedom in the truest sense of the word. Bringing in ideas that they needed to be able to vote. They needed to be able to hold public office. And I submit to you, there's a direct tie between these new notions of liberty to what John Lewis and Diane Nash and Bernard Lafayette and others were fighting to achieve. Let me pull up for a shameless plug for my university. Y'all know most of the marchers were TSU Tigers, right? Freedom Riders too. Okay, so let's tell that story. So a new understanding of freedom. So when you go to these places, you see what I submit to you is what Lincoln called a new birth of freedom. But there's always, always, always a pushback to this. These folks come to these camps seeking refuge. And it looks like things are going to be all right, even though in places like at Fort Negley, they were talking about people dying in large numbers. One guy wrote that he saw every day that he went to the fort, he saw a wagon with 13 bodies in it that weren't in caskets. And that's a mystery there, where those bodies at. Maybe next time I come down here and talk to you, I have a definitive answer. But one thing that they had to worry about was being kidnapped. There was a kidnapping ring that ran out of East Nashville to the forts, to the contraband camps that were around the city, and they were looking for children. And what they would do is they would kidnap these children and they would bring them here to Franklin. And then from Franklin, they would be sent to Alabama. And this was one of those, you know how you can read something and you have to put it down and you'll be like, Lord have mercy. Or just read something that's just so incredible. But when I read this line that I have highlighted really struck me. It says, for likely children 1 to 8, and he's talking about the type of people they were looking for. For likely children from 1 to 8 and 10 years of age, he was to be paid $10 per pound. And for every man and woman he would get out of Nashville and the vicinity, he was to be liberally rewarded. This guy's going around kidnapping children, getting paid for them according to their weight. He's bringing them to a fence that's here in Nashville, in Franklin, who would send them further to the south. Those lives in the camps must have been something else, because I see them as spaces of hope, because you go in there and you're looking for support and you can actually get an education. But also I can envision them as being places of terror, watching your loved ones die, or imagine being a mother there and you notice that your child has a little cough and you start praying that it doesn't get worse. Now, crossings on Jordan's stormy banks. In my classes, I like to show slides like this so that my students can look at their faces, and I ask them, tell me what you see in those faces. In the faces of the children and the parents. It's, you know how there's a difference between being tired and what my dad called weary? Okay, and that's kind of what I see in this. But I as I think about these crossings, y'all know we got markers and monuments all over the place, but can you think of one that just celebrates our transition from enslaved to freed people? Or one that celebrates, that highlights our passage through Jim Crow? Okay, there's no markers in the center of any public squares that celebrate that. But I'm saying that, I'm answering my question. It's like, yes, we do have them. They come in the form of our churches and our schools. So if y'all, and I hadn't been down here to any of y'all's churches. If you give me an invitation on Friends and Family Day, I'll come down and help y'all with your groceries, right? But for those of you who attend churches that date back to this period, I submit to you, those are our monuments that maybe our grandfather was the brick mason that laid the blocks to this church. Perhaps my great uncle was one of the masons that laid the cornerstone. Or my great grandma was the church secretary at this church for many, many years. One of the projects that I've just completed, you know, if you know me, I'll tell you that every project that I'm working on right now is the most important, life-changing thing that I've ever done. I'm saying this about this project here, and we'll see what comes up next time I speak to you. But Promised Land, any of y'all know what Promised Land is? Okay. Promised Land is a community that's just north of Charlotte that was established by black soldiers and their families after the Civil War. So they were able to amass thousands of acres of property and have about 100 families living there. And the purchase of this property was very much a statement to their understanding of liberty. Because once these guys got some money, immediately they was like, okay, we're going to get some land. And then one of the first things they did was they built a church and a school. So for those of y'all that have deep roots here that go back to maybe the end of slavery and the aftermath, y'all probably had a church and a school attached to it. If they're still existing to this day, please ma'am, please sir, I don't care what your new sanctuary look like, don't tear those things down, because there's a very powerful spirit that resides in those buildings. Being able to go out and touch and say, hey, my dad laid the bricks, or my great-grandmother's ties helped pay for this. So Promised Land Church and School are still there. And it's one of those places. Wow, y'all have any places that you can go to and no matter what your mood is like, it's gonna be better after you leave? So I can have the blues when I go to Promised Land. When I leave Promised Land, I was like, I feel all right. Or if I'm feeling good when I go there, when I leave, I'm feeling ecstatic. I'm thinking about my next journey to the place. Wrote this book with Serena Gilbert, who is the matriarch of Promised Land. The thing that really intrigued me about this Reconstruction community is that the history is still there. You know, we have a lot of black towns that dot Middle Tennessee. They were there, but they ain't there no more. I live close to a community that was called Needmore. Y'all know, anybody know Needmore? Okay, it's got that name because the guys, when they settled, they said it needed more women there. You know, a bunch of these. No, that's a true story. The town is not there anymore. But Promised Land is, and this is significant because it was the mothers, the matriarchs in the community that refused to let that history die. And they reached out to me in 2015, and I went there on my birthday and met them for the first time. I thought about how cool it was because you meet your family on your birthday, right? And she expressed a desire to tell those stories. So I said, well, I'll help you with this. So if you get an opportunity, check out the text, not because I'm saying it, because it's one of the few examples that you'll have of this kind of story being told through the eyes of a black woman. Okay. And now, closing thoughts. Okay, I got to the I'm gonna close part. There's a lot of history still out there to uncover, and sometimes it'll be in places that you don't suspect. I was working on a project called Slave Grandchildren Remember, and I went to a assisted living facility in Bordeaux, and I met a guy there named, and y'all might know him. His name was Raymond Northern. Mr. Northern, he was a whip. He first he chastised me for not knowing where Hillsborough Road is. I was like, Mr. Norman, I just got here. I was like, and he said, asked him if he lived in Franklin. And he's like, no, I lived in Williamson County because we was country folk. But Mr. Northern knew his enslaved grandfather. Actually sat down and spoke with him. So I asked him about conversations, and he told me about his grandfather, Harry Berry. And he said that his dad was his enslaver. I think his name was Basil Berry. But they affiliated with Berry Chapel Road. Y'all familiar with that? And he told me about it. He's like, yeah, we one of the first things my grandfather wanted to do once he was freed and we got situated, he wanted to buy a cemetery. And I'm like, buy a cemetery for what, Mr. Northern? He said, because we were being buried on, our former enslavers' land, and animals and stuff was rooting up through the graves. And I said, did he get one? He said, yeah. And he told me where it was. He's like, no, when you get there, that cemetery is going to look like it's carved out of solid rock. I was like, okay, well, I'm going to go anyway. I went out there, and I blew past this church. I blew past the church first time. I was like, oh, Lord, they'll go to church. And I got out of my car, and I'm superstitious, y'all. I got out of my car, and the temperature dropped. Then I'm looking at my phone, it's on 2%. So I was like, okay, let me call the administrative assistant and tell her where I'm at, just in case things go sideways. But I walked up the hill a little bit, and I walked straight to Harry Berry's grave, even though I didn't have any directions on where precisely it was, but I just walked, and then I looked, and it's like, oh my goodness, there it is. So I took this photograph, and it was my intent to show it to Mr. Northern, but he passed away before I could get back to him. So the moral of that particular story is talk to your people. If you got a story to tell, and if you're older, your grandkids got a phone, they can record those stories. Y'all record those stories and archive them. If you wonder about who wants them, hey, Dr. Williams wants them at TSU. And the woman on the right is Callie House. Callie House is actually from Murfreesboro, but she moved to Edge Hill. And when she sets up in Edge Hill, she starts a movement that argues that enslaved people should be compensated for those years of uncompensated labor that they experienced. And you might try to say, wow, how could she make that argument? Well, Confederate soldiers were getting a lot of money from the government, so she's saying, okay, maybe, or perhaps something could be done in that regard. So when you hear the discussions about reparations and things of that nature, being mindful of this. This is an idea that takes root in Middle Tennessee. Okay. And with that, I'll close. I feel like I've been talking an hour now, so I'll I'll stop here and thank you for your time and your attention and participation. Thank you very much. Do y'all usually do Q&A?
Yes, Dr. Williams. That is Rose Hill Cemetery.
Y'all are members?
Our people, when you go visit one, you visit everybody. Because they're all buried there.
Oh, okay.
And when you were speaking of the gentleman that built the headstones,
Edmondson.
Mr. Edmondson, he built a lot of those headstones. They had birds, angels, different things of that nature. People came out during the night. After you get to them, stole them. And then his work got to sell now 200,000, 400,000, 500,000. So they were stealing those.
And Miss Barbara, I almost told you to hold up. Don't tell us where the headstones are, because I know people have been stealing Edmondson's work.
Oh yes, yeah. But they take like the Sotheby's and the big auction house and resell.
Okay. Other questions? Yes, sir.
On Mother's Road, where the Confederates killed the neighborhood, you say we're going to like to see a market, and you know the location.
It's near Laverne, but that's all I know. And I, from the account, it talks about the railroad, but if you're familiar with that, there's a railroad track that runs all the way up and down that road. So I haven't been able to identify it. So I may just have to pick a spot.
You said something earlier about trying to get into the mind of the slaves. Like a lot of people, I got interested in genealogy after I saw the groups in Alex Haley. So I went to doing family research and all. I was calling my father, asking him about these different names, his brothers and sisters, and he was asking me about, how you find out all that information, how you learn it, since I'm doing genealogy. And I asked him about this one lady, Miss Amanda Fisher. She was 98 years old and she died in 1924. And I asked him, I said, do you remember Amanda Fisher? He said, no, I don't know. He said, wait a minute, damn. He said, yeah, that was my great-grandmother. He said, I remember because she was so old when she would get up, my mother would have to take a cloth and wipe her eyes out. I have just quite often just kind of wondered. Died in 98 years old in 1924. I have just wondered, what did she see in her lifetime? And began to comprehend it. What did she witness?
One big miracle, because I can guarantee you that when she was born a slave, she might have dreamed for the end of it, but that would be one of those things that you say, okay.
We just can't comprehend what she witnessed. And back then, they couldn't comprehend that in 2008, a black man would become the president of the United States. They just couldn't comprehend.
Just to piggyback on what he said, one of my members, she's 90 years old.
Okay.
And when Barack Obama became president, he said to me, Reverend, I never thought that I would ever see it. And that was a monumental accomplishment. And there was thousands, millions of people.
A lot of my work is really forward-facing, public-facing, but that's not how they train us in grad school. You know, I'm supposed to be a scholar writing for scholars. But the president, former president of, he was president of Savannah State and also he was president of NAACP at the time. He asked me what I planned to do at the school that I was working at. I was working at, well, the school is Georgia State now, but it was Armstrong Atlantic State. So I said, I want to start a Black Studies program. He's like, all right, that's good. And I said, I want my students to be really engaged in the community, because Savannah, Georgia, when I was there, was about 64% African American. So I felt like my students ought to have an intimate relationship with the community. And he said, all right, but what you gonna do for the folks that don't want to come to your school or can't get into your school? And he was like, when the school opened its doors in 1935, African Americans couldn't come there at all. They could work there in housekeeping and so forth. But he said those folks went there with the dream that one day their kids would be there and they would learn from a professor like you that looked like you. And he's like, you, that professor. He said, don't you think you ought to do just a little bit for them? So it's from that moment on I started doing work that mattered beyond academia. The book I wrote with Miss Gilbert, I remember calling her and telling her that we had got the book contract, and she shouted like she was at revival meeting. And I was like, wow, that made me feel so good, because that cry I heard was almost an ancestral cry, an ancestral shout of joy. So all that is to say this, I feel very strongly that the work that I do should matter beyond academia. But also, and I'll give y'all this one for free, we might need to change what a classroom looks like. That makes sense? I mean, you can come to TSU and I'll give you a good lecture in my classroom, but you got to pay for that, right? That ain't free. So maybe some of y'all who have fellowship halls that are sitting empty on Saturdays, that might be a good spot. Or a library, that might be a good spot. I teach a class called Black Nashville in History and Memory, and my best lectures for the past 3 years has been on the street corners in Nashville. I mean, I'm out here wilding out, pointing in, doing my thing when students are nodding, and it's like, okay, what's going on there, bro? But maybe we can change how we define a classroom, and that'll insulate it from a lot of this foolishness we're dealing with. Okay. All right. Yes, sir. Lamont.
Yeah. You mentioned about the contraband getting kidnapped and sold at a place in Franklin. How did you come across that piece of information, and do you know where that location is?
I'll send it to you. Okay, I will confess, I am a nerd, right? It's like, no kidding. I was just sitting up reading military reports from Ohio. I knew that Ohio was down here in Tennessee. So I was just sitting up reading, and I came across this. Initially, I was actually, be honest, I was looking for something that dealt with Fort Negley. But then they started talking about contraband camps, and I was like, okay, that's probably what they're talking about. And then there it is. And what's crazy about it, man, is those names don't mean nothing to me, but you're a lifelong resident of Franklin. You'll read it like, okay, I know this family, and this family, and it hit a whole different way when you have this sort of attachment to it. Yeah. And don't let me forget, man. Text me or something to remind me, and I'll send it to you.
So young, our people are contraband.
We have a list of the people who are contraband that worked at Fort Dixon. If you want
Our great-grandfather,
great-grandfather and his son, Robin and Edward, worked at Fort, they were enslaved laborers at Fort Dixon. And I have the listing of people if you want to see. I have another comment.
Okay, I heard somebody say something, I'll come back.
There's two more, yeah, go ahead. We got time. So give me
I wanted to piggyback off of his question and ask, why did they kidnap children so young?
I really don't have an answer for that. I
Almost too young to work. They were 1 year old.
maybe easier to control. But with young girls were very valuable because they anticipated them having children. So, okay. Yes, and then Miss Carolyn.
I want to ask you, how do you think you teach children and students that this wasn't that long ago? It's been my experience that students think it was way back.
I tell stories about my great-grandfather who I remember well, and I give them details about that. My great-grandfather was born in 1884, which meant that the transatlantic slave trade was still going on when he was born. But also I do this, it might seem kind of corny, but I do this. I'll make an announcement that I'll give the whole class an A if somebody can bake me a pound cake from scratch. Now, I'm not about to give them, but it gets them engaged, right? And then I'll say, what is in this pound cake? And, they'll give me the ingredients. And I say, okay, where did you get that recipe? I'll probably say from a grandma. And I say, where did she get it from? And I say, grandma. I was like, well, slavery ain't about 3 grandmas away from me, so maybe about 4 for y'all. So that makes it close, because a lot of us know our great-grandparents. And that proximity to them gets them to understand how it's not that far away. Okay.
Did they transport the kidnapped children that they stole from Nashville and brought them to Franklin?
Mm-hmm.
Did they transport them from that railroad station a couple of blocks away?
I do not know. Only thing that I've seen is where they're talking about going down Hillsborough Road and coming to Franklin and meeting a guy here who would then send them on to Alabama.
Have you been to that railroad station, like a couple of blocks away?
No, ma'am, I don't think so.
Railroad station.
Okay.
Moses. Moses there.
Okay, Miss Carolyn.
You feel that?
The James Smith that you mentioned, who was the agent who purchased the kidnapped children, his plantation is located, it's River Rest on Hillsborough Road, and our great-great-grandmother was enslaved there.
Wow, now didn't expect that. Thank you for sharing it with me. Okay, so yes, sir.
It seems that there's been pushback against this history, teaching this history. And including they want to do something with the Smithsonian.
Mm-hmm.
The Smithsonian, not only just the African American Smithsonian, but the other Smithsonians, and also national parks get rid of these plaques that talk about Native Americans and flags. So how do we not have that happen?
And that's
And you're at TSU, but how about at University of Florida or, Governor of Florida does not want to teach this stuff?
hey,
Does our governor come after TSU for teaching this?
I don't know if he knows what I'm doing at TSU. Let me pull up because I see we got cameras.
I was raised in Michigan. I think we had 2 weeks in the Civil War.
And this goes back to what I said before in terms of redefining what a classroom looks like. One of the things that I was part of a group that put up lynching markers in Nashville. And somebody snatched one of them down. The one in Lamont, you remember that one we were trying to do for Sam Smith? He snatched it down and put another one up. But I was like, wow, you need to figure out a way to commemorate the past that in a way that is insulated from a couple of guys with a truck and a chain. And I don't know how we do that. I know at the slave marker, I had a young Yoruba woman who was in my class. She poured out, y'all familiar with what a libation is? She poured out water and recited the names of all of the people that were sold there that we could find. So in many ways, we consecrated that place in a way that little marker, and I said "little" and "little" is a hate word, that marker cannot. So they can tear that down, but that moment that we shared together, that sense of affirmation, that inspiration that we received from that place, it lives beyond the marker. But the marker is good in that, wow, it's right there near the bus station. Y'all think about how many people get off the bus every day in Nashville at that corner. That's the most read thing I've ever written, period. Okay, I think it's time to go.
As you talked about teaching outside of the classroom, when you go down out in the streets, how people are they receptive? The ones that you go to the street corners, are they eager to learn, or eager to hear what you have to say?
Well,
I
usually
thought that was a good concept.
I don't be out there by myself. Usually it's my students, and this generation of students are ride or die. And sometimes we might be talking to them, and an underhoused guy might come through, or somebody will come through there who look like they might not have the best intent, and the students, they'll give him the eye and be like, "What's up?" I'm not on social media. That was one platform I'm on. But when students will come back talking about how they be arguing about something I said on Facebook or whatever they're using right now, it's like, man, just don't get any trouble behind that. Yes?
Did the Underground Railroad come through Franklin or Nashville or any place around Middle Tennessee?
I can't say for certain because the Underground Railroad worked because folks didn't know about it, right? I attend First Baptist Church, Capitol Hill, and I remember somebody saying that, they may have come through there. And I don't know, because Nelson Mary, I don't know if y'all are familiar with him, but he was the pastor of First Baptist, the first colored Baptist church in Nashville. And he was involved in a lot of things, so I wouldn't be surprised. But to answer your question is, I can't say for certain, but I wouldn't be surprised. But we don't have a lot of written record about what, got William Still's book, and maybe there are a couple of others that I can't recall right at the moment, but we don't have that many people who talk about it. Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, to go off of her question about kidnapping of the kids, when the Indians got removed off their land, there was this phrase that really stood out to me. It said, "Kill the Indian, but save the child." Going to your point about wanting to have a fresh mind, to indoctrinate and teach them a new history, and speaking on the importance of the climate that we're in right now with our kids and their history, and to have a question about what do we do about that. So, it's, I guess the importance of today's moment, what do you recommend as far as ensuring that history is preserved? All the different ways.
After the kitchen, the bathroom, and the bedroom, the most important room in your house probably should be your library. And have a wide selection of books as well, not just the stuff that grooves you. I didn't know what I was missing until I started reading poetry, right? And then it started opening up. It's like, okay. And I would suggest that you in addition to having that library, have pictures of your family around if you're cool with your family, right? Like that's things that will elicit stories. And conversations as well. I know that some of your kids might not want to hear about what life was like back in the day. I wasn't like that. I loved to hear my uncles and my father talk. And my mother's family too. Let me tell you all a quick story, then I'll continue with it. There's a space in Georgia outside of Camilla where my mom and her sisters would get together, and they would say that if you came down there at a certain time of day, you could see ghosts. And it was always funny to hear them talk about it, because they would talk about it. And I had this one aunt, they would ask, "You didn't see anything?" She's like, "Nah, I ain't want to see nothing." But I later found out that something called the Camilla Massacre occurred along that stretch of road. And what the sheriff did to these black folks who wanted to vote, he had people waiting at the polls for him. He chased them off with firearms and indiscriminately shot people up and down that road that runs from Camilla to a little town called Bakerton. And when I read that, I was like, that's what Mama and them was talking about. So those stories in terms of images, but those stories in terms of listening to what they have to say. I knew what a sundown town was, for example, before I ever really knew what a sundown town was. Convict leasing, I knew all about that before, because my father would be adamant about going to see his relatives. He's like, but don't go through that town. Don't get caught there at night. And I'm like, we don't have that gas money to be going way around there. And he'd break off some bread so that we would, and he'd be serious about it. But just telling those stories. And I was able to connect that too, because I went to the Lynching Museum down in Montgomery, and I looked at that county where my dad was from. They had so many names on there. If they had to add one more name, then they had to start another column. And my father, who's the bravest, most fierce dude I know, was, he was always in another space when he talked about going to visit his relatives in Georgia. Okay. Thank you for your question. Okay, anybody else? Yes.
Got a comment you made earlier about how slaves, they got their sense of freedom. Well, not sense, but they got free, but then they only lasted X amount of years or months because of sickness. It's just more of a thought that hit me of like how they went from one slave master to another slave master, which is health. And even for us today, just our health can enslave us from just moving forward, or not even health, finances. There's just always this, you try to break you free.
And that's a really deep question, and submit to you, it's all connected in many, many ways, right? The economics can be directly linked to health disparity, access, and other things. But I was trying not to laugh, not because what you said was humorous, but we were talking in class day before yesterday about chitlins. And I'll confess, I've eaten my fair share of them. And if you got some, I will eat some of yours too. But it was like, well, who was the guy that looked at hog chitlins and said that they could do something with that? And I'm sure their last name had to be Williams, because, okay, I'm getting silly now, I'm sorry. Other questions? Okay, yes, sir.
This is the last one. We're going to go ahead and wrap it up.
Before Rachel passed away, I had asked them about a location on Fish University, I think it was by the old jail, where they also used to sell slaves. And he told me, he said, it seemed like I do remember something like that, and he was going to look into it, but Yes.
Where Jubilee Hall sits was a contraband camp.
Okay.
Yeah.
It was opened by the.
It was at Jubilee Hall. And it's interesting too because those camps become the seeds of black communities. So if you're in Nashville and you go to Edgehill, or you go out east to Edgefield or North Nashville, or for those of y'all that are from Memphis, there was a big camp on the south side of town in Memphis. Okay. All right, y'all. Feel like I'm running long. Thank y'all so much for coming out and appreciate you.
Let's do it again, one more time. Let's do it again. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
So much, and thank you, everybody. We have a great crowd. Fran, you're gonna get some pictures. You're gonna come this way so you get some pictures of the crowd. Okay, we have a nice crowd, so we appreciate everybody. We want to thank. We meditated again on meeting neighbors for the food, and there's still some over there, so y'all before you leave, please grab some. And we have some other porch talk, people who have done porch talks here recently. Ms. Andre Prince Jeffers, we had her, and we have Miss Alma Battle. And Donnell Lane, the mayor of Mayor of Carter Street, Mayor of Strong Street. So we always look forward to everybody. We look forward to more, and some of y'all will be doing too in the future because it's all about, okay, excuse me.
We got the niece of Miss Andre, she's here also.
My name's Kim Chris. I just relocated here from LA, and she is like historian, so she knows a lot.
I think you came to the McLemore house.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah, and we have a book, on Majesty Street, talk about the Civil War. On Majesty Street is one of the districts, neighborhoods that were established after the Civil War, and Miss Thelma Battle has written 4 books, and she's going on for 5th one, right? On Majesty Street. And so I don't know which one you have already, so you can choose. This is her latest, and she's got one she's doing right now, and there's one before that, so you can decide which one. And she's going to sign it.
All right, let's let you sign it.
Thank you so much, and you're now a member of the African American Heritage Society membership.
All right, thank you.
And thank you. Does anybody else have anything else? Any announcements, anything?
So when is the next meeting?
It is the 4th, Monday in October.
Oh, it's always the 4th Monday. Oh, okay. I knew that.
Interesting, it's gonna be, we're going into Veterans Day, so it's gonna be, slaves and soldiers, so talking slaves and soldiers, and, then also Masons. Did anybody, know, we have a guy who's born and raised here, and he's a Mason. We heard a lot about the Masons. Ms. Val has that in one of her books about the Masons. And there's some interesting things about that. So we want to just keep sharing the history as much as we can. And thank you all for sharing the information about your relatives, your ancestors, Barbara. Okay, good.
I would just like to commend Dr. Williams on the excellent work and the excellent presentation.
Thank you.
It's so important that we continue to create enthusiasm and promote awareness of African American history in Williamson County, because now we have less than 5% population as African Americans here. And it is urgent that anybody who's interested in telling the true story get interested in carrying the work on the history of African Americans, especially in this place.
Thank you so much.
If I could make one statement. As you all know, my great-granddaddy, Randall Brown, was honored last year. 2 months ago, I found something else out. He was also one of the founders that were found Providence Primitive Baptist Church. And I thought that was awesome.
Well, thank you for sharing.
So I just wanted to let you all know that we still finding out more.
Yes, and when we, 264 matches, you always have an opportunity to talk, on video and share some of the stories. We wanna have that, we wanna document that, we wanna make sure that we have that history. So if you are interested in sharing your history, please give your name to Beth. Where are you, Beth? Give your name to Beth and we'll pass that on to our committee that does that. And that way you'll be able to share things on, from before the Civil War, the ancestors on up to civil rights. We've got people in here who their families were part of the civil rights the era, right? So we just want to hear stories from as many people as possible, because once we're gone, we're gone. I mean, we're making history now. So thank you all once again, and there's food up there.